This is a board that's been pretty hyped as of late, especially from a sweet video from Wildcat, and I've been getting a few comments asking about it, so here it is, the Monstargear Ninja 87 XO V2. So this is an in-stock keyboard, so you can just buy this off the website and get a couple of days later from South Korea, which is unusual in the custom mechanical keyboard world, as majority of custom mechs are run through group buys. So in this really nice box, we get a key switch puller, a wire keycap puller, this brush which you can clean your board with, a couple of rubber feet and an ID sticker, a USB Type-C cable. Again, please stop folding these things, please. Interestingly, and amazing actually, a little tube of super lube, which kind of tells me that they know what they're doing. And finally the board itself, which is very well protected. Straight out of the box, and you really feel the weight, but before we get into it, let's chuck on the rubber feet to protect that super shiny weight on the bottom. But as we can see, there's no designated spots or indentations for these feet. And just check out how shiny this thing is. Alright, let's take it apart. There's a couple of Phillips head screws on the bottom, and these are nice chunky M3 screws. Now we can see how it's put together, but more importantly, the mounting method. On the website, they mentioned that it's a sandwich mount, meaning that the plate is sandwiched between the top and bottom aluminium pieces, and isn't screwed to anything. Then we have the PCB, which would be held in by the key switches, so not fixed to anything. They also have a piece of thin foam, not the thickest stuff, but it should help in some way potentially with the feel and sound. And then to remove the weight, there's just a couple of Phillips head screws. And just to be clear, I'm only taking this apart to have a closer look at everything. All you would need to do is to chuck on some key switches and keycaps to make it work. Okay, here's the top aluminium piece, nice and solid of course, and these holes are for those long screws that come through the bottom of the base. Finish is pretty nice on the inside as well, not that it particularly matters, but yeah. Here's the super shiny plate. We don't often see too many PVD brass plates because they're just a tad harder to work with and are more expensive, so it's a pleasant surprise because it did turn out good on mine. Also, the stabs are already installed. Unfortunately, they are plate mount stabs, which we'll have a closer look at later. Another big feature of this board is the PCB, which has Kailh Hotswap sockets. It has the alignment holes for the 5-pin key switches, which is good for durability, and has SMD RGB LEDs for backlighting. There's also these smaller LEDs on the left and right edges for that side glow. Here's the PVD brass weight, which is a 7mm thick bar that goes from end to end. Again, PVD brass, but no warp, perfectly straight, so yeah, awesome. And it weighs 420 grams. For reference, an An Pro or Taku 1-2 Mini is 600 to 700 grams, so yeah, definitely adds heft. The base is made from aluminium. There's a lot of these support pillars all over the bottom, which is interesting, and it's apparently there because it's a hot swap board. They don't go against the bottom of the PCB, rather the PCB has holes for these more for alignment, so it shouldn't affect much I think. The bottom piece also positions everything. These protrusions position the plate for when you sandwich the pieces together, and then there's another protrusion on the top and bottom that positions the top alu piece. A sandwich mount design should provide a more even and consistent sort of feel and sound, as the forces are more evenly distributed around the plate rather than in various spots under the plate, although it can potentially feel a little stiff because of that. Interestingly, the foam seems to be thick enough that it has a spongy effect on the plate, which is good to see. Alright, so one of the weak points that I noticed, and everyone else that are into mechs probably noticed as well, are these stabilizers. These are plate mount stabs, so you don't have much choice for aftermarket options, and yeah, they just tend to be not that great. But I can understand why they use them, just so it's more of a ready to go and super consumer friendly product. But they're terrible, and they know this, so they gave us Super Lube. I usually just dip my wires in, but you can't do it with this, so first I try to apply it on the ends of the wires straight from the tube, which isn't optimal. You can also try and brush it on, but still I prefer a thicker layer of lube, so I straight up just squeeze the lube into the hole that the wire goes into. And with all of that, this is how they sound. Pretty bad, really bad actually. I also did end up brushing lube thinly up on the inside of the housings, but still they're pretty terrible. Also, I'm not so sure on the lube. Personally, I use this dielectric grease, which is much thicker. This stuff is pretty thin in my opinion. Super Lube is often recommended and I've used it in the past. However, the brand Super Lube has different types, with this one in particular being a synthetic grease. But I don't think it matters too much, as the main issue is that the stabs just move around way too much in the plate. And this is a very common issue for retail mechs, most of which use plate mount. Luckily, this is an easy fix, we just have to tighten the hole. You can use whatever, but I had fabric band-aids, so I used them. After fixing up the stabs, it's time to put in the key switches. Having a Hotswap PCB, all we gotta do is push the key switches in, make sure that the pins are straight when you put them in, and you'll be right. As it's using the Kale Hotswap sockets, it is compatible with pretty much any MX style key switch, so that includes Cherry MX, Gatoron, Kale, Altemu, Duroc, whatever. But for this particular build, we have redbacks, courtesy of my friends at Daily Clack, a great Australian mech store. And these are a 67g linear switch manufactured by Duroc. And I lube them with Cristo MCG 111 and use TX films, also from Daily Clack. And here it is. Starting board. It has a real presence on the desk, and I think a Tentaculus board just naturally does that in my opinion. It's bigger than a lot of customs tend to be. You just get to see more of the board, more metal, which is definitely the case here, with pretty thick 8mm bezels. From the top down view, it's a pretty blocky design with the chamfer along the top edge. Very clean, simple and traditional looking, but then it gets a little bit more interesting. The top piece is larger than the bottom, so the parting line is like a lip. And then of course we have these sides. A bunch going on here. The brass weight can be seen, which is pretty unique, but the main attraction is the RGB lighting with quite a large cutout, but as we can see it is a solid side, so completely closed. And the lighting kind of lights up the whole cutout as well, making the side look more glowy. I like it. It's busy and angular but still pretty clean and gives the keyboard its character. It can get pretty bright, spilling onto the desk. Personally, I like it at about half brightness, and I'm cool with RGB, but you can have singular colors like white if you want something a bit more clean. On the rear we have our USB Type-C port, however it's in this weird off-center spot, obviously so it doesn't interfere with the key switch, but it's just a weird looking spot. Either pick a side or have it centered in my opinion. The brass weight spans the bottom, kind of like the RamaWorks U80, mad fingerprint magnet, and adding something shiny as an accent looks cool, but otherwise the finish is pretty sweet, no scratches or dents, and that goes for the anodized aluminium as well. Overall clean and even. This does have RGB backlighting if you're into that. You'll need key switches with some sort of transparency to be able to see it, and if you're going to get a board like this, you're probably not going to use backlit keycaps. But even so, it's pretty strong because of the PVD finish on the brass plate. And all of this can be customized with the downloadable software. And this is the other potential downside of the board. It does not support QMK, which most customs do. It's a pretty standard suite, so we can create different profiles and can customize each key to do all of these things. And that includes macros, which we can record in the macro section with delays and such. And everything is applied instantly. Personally, this is all fine for me as I never really go deep into customizing keys, especially with a TKL board with all of these keys available. Now let's get to the typing experience. Being a dual linear switch, I thought the redbacks would be really smooth, especially based on my experience with the alpaca switches. In stock form, they were pretty scratchy. This is straight out of the packet, no wearing in, like quite a bit more than the alpacas, which had nylon bottom housings and pom stems. Instead, these have polycarbonate housings. Anyway, I lubed and filmed them, and here's how they sound. Wonderful typing experience. The switches still have a touch of scratch, but when you're actually using it and typing out fast, they're fine and feel smooth overall, and they also have a nice weight with the 67-gram springs. Obviously the key switch determines a lot of the feel and sound, but the feel of the board is very consistent all around as expected with its sandwich mount design, but it doesn't feel overly stiff or anything, even though there's like no flex to it. I actually like the bottom mount. It has a pretty nice stocky feel, not too harsh, not too hard, and the sound is fantastic. Again, thocky sounding and a deepish sound. Even without my mat, I couldn't hear much table sound at all, very low reverb, and the board just seems to take it all in, which is awesome. But it's not quiet or anything, it's just that it sounds all contained. And the stabs, way better than before, but still not amazing. Touch rattle, but also not the smoothest. And that's the Monstargear XO V2 mechanical keyboard. Let's get straight into it. This comes in at 300 USD, and while that is a lot of money, and yes, it's an expensive keyboard, this is actually relatively cheap in the custom or high-end mech world, especially for TKL boards. This is a sandwich mount aluminium TKL with PVD brass plate and weight, which is sizable. Finish on all the parts is good. It has Kale Hotswap sockets, RGB backlighting, and side glow, comes with proper packaging, a bunch of extras including super lube, and a big plus is that it's an in-stock product. No group buy, no pre-order, no waiting, although it'll probably sell out soon. The only negatives I have are the stabilizers. They're not great even with the included lube, but they can be fixed as I showed. It's a tough one. It's like a ready to go sort of board rather than like a full DIY sort of thing, so I can understand why they use these cheap plate mount stabs, but it's a high-end product and for real, Bradley stabs can bring down a whole board, doesn't matter how good everything is. And it doesn't support QMK, which may be an issue for some. Legit, if they fix up the stab situation with the potential V3 while keeping it at this sort of price, it really would be an absolute banger of a board. We just don't see this sort of thing often at this sort of price. You'd expect something like this to maybe be in the $400 range and not even being stocked, so in my opinion it's pretty impressive just based on all the pieces you get. At the time of this video, the V1 is also still available at a much lower price of 180 USD, but it's a tray mount board, and this probably won't be available for much longer too as it is a limited product. Then honestly you really can't get much better than this. Big thanks to Monstargear for sending this board out, and to Daily Clack for providing the key switches and films. All links in the description.